5:17-8, I think it is. Incredible verse. For us, that's an indication of those who came after the prophets, who, for one reason or another, ended up distorting the true message. So, the call of the prophets in the Quran, if you read it long enough, you'll come to an inescapable conclusion that their call was consistent and very simple. So in the Quran, God says that we sent to every nation a messenger, saying, worship Allah, your Lord and my Lord. That was the call of the prophets and messengers. It wasn't to make themselves. Are you okay with being on camera, by the way?
You probably don't want to be on camera.
You can talk.
No, because I'd rather you guys. I speak to you alone. So if it means turning the camera off,
I don't mind. You can hide behind me.
I can be in. It's fine.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I just got pulled into a street interview last year, and then it got posted, and I got trolled.
Okay, so whatever you're going to do, make sure you put this up without cutting, okay? No cutting and pasting. They do that anyway, honestly. These guys are pretty good in that regard. So the call of the prophets and messengers has always been one and the same, a consistent call. In fact, in the Quran, God says that mankind were once one nation. They were once one nation, and then they began to differ. And that differing occurred because of the fact that they turned away from the truth itself. So for the Muslims, truth is very narrow in its definition. It's not expansive. There aren't shades of grey when it comes to truth. The truth ultimately is from God, who describes himself as Al-Haq, the truth. And the understanding of the religion of Islam is that every child is not born in sin. It's born pure. It's born in a state of what's known as a fitrah, which is a natural pure disposition, a sort of a true north that points towards the transcendent. It's what some scientists today have referred to as, that evolutionary godly trait that human beings apparently are used and continue to use as a utilitarian means.
Would you filter that down to objective morality then?
Yes, I would.
Yeah.
I would say that.
I was just trying to use this argument to the guy over there about going after antinatalism and whatnot, because he fundamentally doesn't believe that there's meaning to existence.
Oh, really?
And what first brought me to want to research and learn more about Islam and religion generally is I do believe that there's objective morality. So there's objective morality, then you can assign meaning, and fundamentally, that takes you back to a creator of sorts.
Precisely.
But then it's about trying to define that and understand, well, everybody here and a bunch of people think they've got the right idea.
Yep.
Who's got it right?
Who's got it right?
And look, I haven't grown up religious, so it's this process of limbo, investigating, trying to learn what makes sense.
Let's talk about objective morality. I think it's something that the Muslim scholars have spoken about, and they've given the indication that objective morality is something that literally emanates from that fitrah, that pure disposition. So the Prophet ﷺ, Muhammad, upon him be peace, he's the last and final messenger. He said that every child is born upon the fitrah, this pure disposition, but its mother and father inculcate within it Judaism, Christianity, or Zoroastrianism. In other words, the environment that you're brought up in will either dictate you continue to maintain that purity, or you're going to be pushed away from that purity and thereby end up adopting things that may turn you away from that narrow concept of truth. So whether we as human beings, we live in the middle of the Amazon jungle, whether we're Aborigines in Australia or whether we're living in the most advanced cities, we all agree that there are certain golden rules that when we come together as a group, we want to try and maintain. Because it's in our best interest to maintain a certain level of harmony. Getting excited. It happens now and again, right?
I was going to ask, so you say being born in a state of purity in your parents, how does Islam guide you to keep that purity? What's I don't know an answer, what sense to keep
Exactly. So the purity is the obvious notion of doing good in the world, right? When you two got together as a couple, naturally within you have an innate disposition of wanting to do things that are in your best interests. In your best interests, right? So for instance, you know instinctually that if I lie, it's not going to be healthy for my relationship. If I deceive, it's not going to be healthy for my relationship, because you've learned that from an early age. There is something within the innate human nature that recognizes a priori, meaning intuitively, that there are certain things that if we go against that nature, it's going to be detrimental to us. Whether we're living in the middle, like I said, in the middle of a tribe that we consider in this society to be barbaric, or whether we're a professor, we all recognize fundamental
atheist,
truths.
The atheist would just say that that's selfishness, and that's
Believe it or not, Richard Dawkins, he believes in the golden rule. The idea that every human being recognizes certain fundamental moral truths. And Islam recognizes this as well. That human beings, when they come together, they want to do good. But the question is, how do we maintain that? Ultimately, you come to a point where the inevitable question arises, well, what's my purpose in life? What is my purpose in life? I was just speaking to a gentleman. I said, what's your purpose in life? He said, well, my purpose in life is to try and find my purpose in life. I said, well, that's kind of recursive. What is your ultimate purpose in life? There's anyone's. Yeah, yours, mine, whoever's, right? There has to be a reason why we've been placed on this earth. So this brings us down to the fundamental question of how we were brought into this universe. Where did this universe arise from ultimately? Did it come about through chance and probability? Was it always here? These are questions that the Quran addresses. But believe it or not, Islam and the Quran and the prophets in general, they didn't go about placing emphasis on convincing people that God exists. Because they took it as a fundamental truth alongside the very many fundamental moral truths that there is a transcendent God. That instinctually human beings believe in the transcendent. So if you read the Quran, as you're doing, you're going to find that the Quran doesn't bother with fundamentally with questions of the existence of God. It takes it essentially as a given, but then it guides you and says, okay, this God exists. He's going to give you certain laws. He wants you to live in a particular way. What way should you be living? And then the Quran sort of navigates through those choppy waters. But in the Quran, God asks the question for the atheists, for the people who perhaps have doubt, فَأَيْنَ تَذْهَبُونَ? Where then are you going? Where are you going in life? You're born, you live, you have a good time, you die, and that's it. What is the ultimate purpose? How did you come into existence? There's a verse in the Quran which, when one of the companions of the Prophet he heard, he said it was the first time that faith truly entered and settled into my heart. And the verse is threefold and it's very simple. The verse says, or were they created from nothing? Or did they create themselves? Or are they the creators of the heavens and the earth? Nay, they have no certain knowledge. It's a threefold question. Were they created by nothing or from nothing? The question is, nothing is the absence of absolutely anything. So when we talk about nothing, we're talking about the absence of power, energy, will, etc.,
so
etc.
This one doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So from that, deductively, you go down to ask the question: well, were they created from nothing, or did they create themselves? Well, we know we didn't create ourselves because fundamentally, no. Fundamentally, and scientists recognize this as well, otherwise we wouldn't have science. Causes and effects. The law of causality is something that is rooted within not just how we do science, how we recognize the world, but things that we see intuitively day to day. We rely upon certain inferences to make certain decisions in life. So take that back right to the beginning and ask yourself, well, if we weren't created from nothing, something must have brought us into existence. We didn't create ourselves, so we're part of the problem as to how we were brought into existence. Or did they create the heavens and the earth? Well, we're part of the system. And if we didn't bring ourselves into existence, and the universe itself couldn't have brought itself into existence, because that would imply that it was brought about from nothing, which we've agreed can't bring about something. Ultimately, there needs to be something that brought all of this into existence, which doesn't require anything itself to be brought into existence.
So, I agree. But then, what's the rationale to accept that?
The truth always comes off the butt. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, so what's the rationale to accept that Islam's explanation of God as this entity, the explanation for existence, is correct?
Yeah.
Because the argument is then all these multiple religions will claim that they have the truth.
Yeah.
What makes Islam infallible?
So Islam begins with the statement and the understanding that mankind was once one nation, and then they began to differ. And then God says in the Quran that He sent to each nation a prophet or a messenger guiding the people back to the truth. And the fundamental truth is وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. God says, we did not create jinn, which is an alternate form of life, nor mankind, except to worship Him.
So can I just dive in quickly? So that's an interesting one for me, because we can talk about whether or not about the Quran's infallibility, because this is the doctrine, whether or not that's true and believable. But one thing for me is, from a belief perspective, there comes a time we have to make a leap of faith.
Yes, absolutely.
Whether you are an atheist or you believe in religion. So the explanation of jinn, because you brought it up, is an interesting one for me, because this is something that in my life I haven't experienced. So it's a hard thing to make a leap of faith to say, okay, well, I want to believe in Islam, but to believe in jinn is a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, it is.
You know, and that's one of the pillars, belief in angels and jinn.
Belief in the angels, belief in the unseen world. In fact, you read the Quran, chapter 2, very early on in the Quran, God says, and those who believe in the unseen world.
Yeah,
So there is a certain level of faith where he's recognized you've got to make a leap of faith. But it's not a blind leap of faith. It needs to be undergirded with certain fundamental truths. So the Quran doesn't just say believe, but it doesn't say don't believe either. Ultimately, belief is going to be rooted in the unseen world, and that will only come about when we die and we're confronted by the reality of the world to come. But before then, our belief should be undergirded by certain proofs and evidences. So what are the evidences? So belief in the angels, belief in the unseen world. Ultimately, if you believe that there is a creator, the creator has certain qualities necessarily. This being needs to be not contingent, because like I said, otherwise the question will arise, who created him? So this being needs to be outside of the realms of causality. It brought the universe into existence. It has certain qualities that we can affirm. It must have a will, because it brought the universe into existence at some moment. It must have a certain level of power, because the universe itself necessitates a certain level of complexity, that the cause of which brought it into existence must have a certain something to it. Power. He's already reading the Quran, mashallah. So make dua for him.
She can take that one.
Oh yeah. Sorry, go on.
No, so I was saying she can take that one. But
Yeah. Take it now, just in case I forget. You won't fight over it, right? So, this maker has certain qualities. It must have power. It must have knowledge, because we know that the universe has certain, and the scientists tell us this. So we turn to the ones who claim that they have knowledge of the world. Certain fundamental laws, without which the universe, as we know it, wouldn't have arisen. Had those laws been slightly tweaked one way or the other, then the universe as we know it would cease to exist, or wouldn't even have started in the first place. So we know that the quality of God needs to be a certain way. So the Quran states that God is the absolute. If you read chapter 112 of the Quran, it says, "Qul huwa Allahu ahad." And if I give you just this short verse, some of the scholars say it represents 1/3 of the Quran, because 1/3 of the Quran is in reference to God Himself. The other third is about the hereafter and the day of judgment, the unseen world, etc. The verse, the surah has it, "Qul huwa Allahu ahad." Say He is Allah, the one and only. One and only. So in other words, there can't be two contingent beings, because otherwise, two necessary beings, otherwise they wouldn't be necessary to begin with. There has to be one necessary being, and everything else is contingent and dependent upon it. So, "Qul huwa Allahu ahad." Say He is Allah, the one and only. Allahu samad. Allah, the absolute, the self-subsistent. He requires nothing. He is the one that brought everything into existence. He needs to therefore exist eternally. Because to say that He had a beginning would necessitate the same question that we posed for the universe, which would make Him contingent. So you can't go back in the past indefinitely. So Allahu Samad. He is the self-subsisting, the eternal. He requires nothing. Lam yalid wa lam yulad. He begets not, nor is He begotten. He doesn't produce anything from Himself. And nor is He produced from anything. And as a result, if you just go through those four rationally, the only inescapable conclusion is وَلَمْ يَكُنْ اللَّهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٍ. That He is therefore the one who is the one worthy of being worshipped, if you will. He's the one that requires adoration. So that pull that we instinctually have towards the transcendent, it cannot be diverted towards the creation. So that's one fundamental truth.
And so you would say then, as a result, okay, I'll question
any religion that says that God came down in the form of a human being and therefore that human being is worthy of being worshipped, or that God should be worshipped in the form of idols, or that God is more than just one being, that is three persons in one, or as the Hindus say, Trimurti, three beings. Did he just do what I think he did there? Anyway.
He just put his hand on
Anyway,
Let's go.
exactly. But yeah, so anything that from creation, in fact, I'll give you two in a verse. God says, do not prostrate yourselves to the sun and the moon. You find many religions from the past, and even today, prostrating themselves to the monkey god, to the cow god, to the sun, to the moon, to anything from creation. So God says, do not prostrate yourselves to the sun and the moon, but rather prostrate yourselves to the one who created the sun and the moon, if you are true believers. So from there, the Quran eliminates all those religions that claim to be from God, but are establishing intermediaries in human beings, normal human beings like us, being able to connect with God. Islam, you will never find a single verse in the Quran that speaks about genealogy or lineage being an intermediary for a person being saved.
So I agree with that narrative, but then so the Quran is the correct narrative, but what's to say that the Quran itself is correct? What's the proof that, because there'll be parts of the Quran that you don't like, parts that are difficult to deal with?
Absolutely.
Dealing with women in the Quran,
Absolutely.
in the UK and the West, there's plenty of things.
We've got to move back before he comes and touches me as well.
I'm sure there's plenty of things that she won't like about the Quran, about what it says about women.
Yeah, no doubt. Look, there's going to be certain things that you're going to come across in the Quran morally that you will find objectionable.
But given that the Quran is correct, fine, no problem. But how do you prove that the Quran itself, its creation is correct?
What makes Quran unique amongst other scriptures is that it is the claim that it has, which other scriptures I don't think either claim, and if they do claim, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. The Quran is the only scripture that I know of on this earth that claims to be what's known as ipsissima verba, the very words of God. And if you read, it reads like this is from God. It reads like this is the narrative of God. There's no Muhammad said. Do you know that in the Quran, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who is supposed to be the author of the Quran, but though he's not, because we have the speech of the Prophet, and we have the speech of the Quran, and the experts in Arabic, and this includes non-Muslim experts, linguists of Arabic, they say that the speech of the Prophet is nothing like the speech of the Quran. It's like two different individuals. So the Quran is the only scripture that states that it is from God. The Quran is self-referential and it's challenging. In the Quran, I don't think any other religion says this. The Quran challenges human beings. It says, if you believe that this is from anyone other than Allah, then find a contradiction in it. Find a discrepancy in it. And it challenges human beings to do that. And then the arguments, we can look into the arguments. A person comes to us and says, look, mate, I found a contradiction in the Quran. So we sit down, we look at it, we find out whether it truly is a contradiction, and then we go from there. But ultimately, and this is just taking a few steps further on, when we've exhausted those avenues and our arguments against the author of the Quran have been satisfied, then it should stand to reason that morally, the one who revealed the Quran also revealed a moral system that, although initially there may be certain parts to it that you may find unpalatable, but you should treat the truth as it ought to be treated. Truth shouldn't be treated like the flavor of ice cream. Oh, today I feel like having, I don't know, chocolate. Tomorrow it's going to be strawberry. It should be treated like medicine. Our scholars have said that when you go towards the truth, treat it like medicine. That no matter how you have cancer, you are not going to, unless you're mad and you want to just pass away or whatever, you choose to pass away, whatever you want to do. Normally people will want to just take the medicine because they want to carry on their life. They have a responsibility towards people whom they love, and they love him. So the Quran actually has it in it that if you've exhausted all the avenues, then treat the truth as the truth and don't treat it as though you want the Quran to follow you rather than you submit yourself to the Quran. Now and you have many people in the park becoming Muslims, Muslim means the one who submits his will to the will of God. And the reason why that concept is so important is because of the fact that if you believe the truth, you believe you're contingent, you believe you're limited, and you ultimately believe that there's a source out there that has knowledge above which you can't have any more knowledge, power above which you can't have any more power, and all these other qualities, wisdom, then you ought to submit yourself to this being because you recognize that it brought you into existence. Now, you may find certain things in the Quran that you find initially morally objectionable. But if this is the truth, and here's the truth, here's the if clause, and this is where you guys go away, be sincere, look into the Quran, come back here to Speaker's Corner or get in contact with the mosques. Believe it or not, since Palestine, the issue of Palestine, the number of people who are becoming Muslims on account of just looking at the Palestinians living their life through nothing but faith alone, it's incredible. But if you have questions, go and ask. You know, guys, I find this verse in the Quran regarding women objectionable. I find this in the Quran objectionable. Find out why the Quran initially gave this law. What's the wisdom behind it? What are the scholars saying? What was the situation at that time? Sorry, just very quickly. What was the situation at that time that necessitated that this law be brought into effect before eventually perhaps being expunged or mitigated in some sense? So that's in a nutshell.
So the Quran mentions slavery
Yes.
a couple of times, and it's sort of accepted as the institution. And it seems, as I've understood it as I read, to be an okay thing. Whereas, so I'm interested to hear your take. Because that's the one thing, like there's small things where morally I'll be like, I'm not so sure about that, but I can understand.
You're being kind here. I think it's a big thing for you.
Yeah,
and
sure.
it is a big thing for other people.
Yeah.
But the Quran, you have to understand the milieu in which the Quran was revealed. When the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he came down with the message, when he was sent the message, I should say, at the age of 40, the peninsula at that time, the world at that time, was rooted in the concept of slavery. There were wars taking place left, right, and center, and this is also true of the pagan Arabs of that time. They would go to war at the smallest of excuses, and that war would carry on for centuries to the point where they would come together and they wouldn't know why their ancestors got into a war. But the idea that they had at that time was that if you have the audacity to raise your sword against us and you want to exterminate us, if we end up winning, we're going to take your spoils. And this is true of the Roman Empire, this is true of the Chinese Empire, this is true of all people, and this is, don't take my word for it, this is on camera, just go do your own research. You'll find that the world was steeped in this concept, that you can take the women folks and the children and anything because they chose to either attack you or you chose to attack them, and you can take them in this way.
So the historical context gives precedent to the Quran sort of just laying the land as it was at the time.
Laying the law?
Laying the law for the land as it was.
Exactly, laying the law for the land and educating the masses towards a particular end. So for instance, let's take a parallel example which you guys may not find as unpalatable. In fact, you guys might find it delicious. But in terms of its moral outlook, it would be equivalent to something that many people who don't drink alcohol will find objectionable, perhaps even more so than slavery, because alcohol is one of the prime reasons why there is so much money wasted on year in a society which makes alcohol permissible to drink. 71% of all crimes in the UK are committed, 70% are committed under the influence of alcohol. And they recognize that alcohol is a poison. And they recognize it should be now drunk in proportions. In the past, it was recommended that we drink alcohol, a certain amount of wine, because it's apparently supposed to be good for your heart. Only for them to make a U-turn 20 years later, and I was using this argument 20 years ago, did a U-turn on this, saying that no, what we thought was good for you is now bad for you. So just to give a parallel to this. Now the Quran didn't come and say to the pagan Arabs, alcohol is forbidden for you, and that's it. Destroy all the alcohol barrels that you have and give up alcohol. Why? Because the pagan Arabs were just as steeped in the imbibing of alcohol as other societies. It wouldn't make sense to take a people whose entire society was established upon a particular way of life and who were making money from this, to say to them, you know what, get rid of every evil in one fell swoop, and let's go down the path of truth. They'll pull out the sword and probably get rid of that man there and then. There's no wisdom behind it. Just like when you talk to people who are addicted to alcohol, they'll go to something like Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a gradual process because they know you take